I'm Jonah Comstock, editor-in-chief of PharmaForum. I'm here at JP Morgan. Our last interview of the show chronologically. We are here, it's Wednesday afternoon, and I'm here with Michelle Longmire, CEO of Medable. We're going to talk a little bit about clinical trials. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jonah.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So what I've been doing is just asking folks to tell me a little bit about what they do, what brings them here, and then we'll talk about what we're seeing, what we're hearing. Clinical trials in particular, very big interest of mine right now. We can talk about that in a little bit. So I'm excited to hear kind of some of your takes.
Awesome. I am CEO of Medable, and we're providing a platform to really improve access to clinical trials, a process called decentralization. And we're working with pharma companies, big and small, to really help them execute clinical trials in a way that not only can improve the cost profile by reducing the time, but also provides a better approach to the diversity challenge we see in clinical trials. Only 7% of participants come from diverse backgrounds. We know that the traditional site model has not worked to drive diversity. We also know that model is what costs $2.6 billion to develop a new drug. So, we need disruption of the status quo in how we're developing drugs, and Medable is bringing new technological approaches, really consumer scale clinical trial participation.
So the story we are always hearing is that decentralized trials got they've been there, people have been working on them, people have been developing them, but not a ton of traction. COVID-19 hits, everything goes virtual, and suddenly everyone's using decentralized trials for everything, right?
Yeah, well, I wish.
Right.
However, it certainly has gone from an edge case to much more of a main case. So prior to the pandemic, there were good reasons to believe that decentralized clinical trials would provide value to these core challenges: time, cost, and diversity. Yet there really wasn't enough momentum. There wasn't a reason to make this big shift. And during the pandemic, with all the site closures, pharma companies suddenly were kind of left flat-footed. How are we going to continue the current trials? And so Medable and other DCT companies, I think, became really pivotal in that phase to be able to continue research and to launch new trials while the sites were closed. Now, an important part of that journey was that over, basically a 2-year time frame, we developed enough data to take a really empirical look at what is the impact. And we worked with the Tufts Center for Drug Development and have shown a $40 million per medicine, if you do phase 2 and phase 3 with this approach, net present value or ROI. So if you think about, drug manufacturers going from 30, 60 different, clinical trials, sometimes upwards of 90, $40 million per shows big savings across the portfolio, to the degree to which you might actually be able to take new shots on goal, start to develop medicines that otherwise, may not have been economically viable.
Right. So I definitely want to talk about the diversity piece, but I want to give that its due. So before we do, let's talk a little bit about the other benefits of decentralized. Why does it create these savings?
Yeah. What we've learned, and again, these are really early days. So our first analysis suggests that, one, you have fewer something called protocol deviations. What this means is that sites are able to operate against the protocol with a higher degree of compliance. We're exploring why that is the case. Is it that they have a better understanding of the clinical trial as they're able to get more digital inputs around how the patient's doing, what the expectations are in the trial? The other thing is shortening the overall timelines to enrollment. And it's not too surprising that, if you're enrolling from better access points, places patients cross or people cross day to day, a CVS, a Walgreens, versus, a Penn Medicine, a Stanford, not that those aren't important places. How often are you walking in there versus your retail pharmacy corner store? So what we're showing is that, one, the compliance with the protocol and the science is higher, and the enrollment is faster.
Yeah. So that does sort of bring us to the diversity piece too, or the representativeness piece, right? Because lots of folks are working on that right now, and some of them are doing it in a decentralized way, and some of them are doing it in a traditional way. But the common denominator seems to be that the recruiting site is hugely important. Where are these patients, and where are we finding them, right?
Yeah. And I think that, with the omnibus that came out through the legislature in the end of 2022, it's really applying more pressure to pharma to say, this is not only an ethical responsibility of yours, it's a scientific and a medical responsibility. We need to have more diversity in the clinical trials, now those diversity plans are going to be a part of the clinical development plan. And I think that's really important because, again, when only 7% of a total population of patients participating come from diverse backgrounds, we know we need to do better. And it's also going to help us ensure that the drugs that we're developing are safe and efficacious across all populations, and also understand better where they're most effective.
Right.
So I don't think anyone has a silver bullet solution to this, but I think your point was really a good one. First, understanding, how do we ensure that patients and populations of all types trust and understand the research process, and how do they have access? And so I think that DCT tackles the access piece, but I think there's still a lot more work to do, and then we need to measure our results.
So we talked briefly about the fact that that COVID was good for DCTs, and I mean COVID was good is probably not ever a good way to start a sentence, but there was an opportunity there.
Right.
But now we're back to quote unquote normal. And I know in the telehealth world there was a startling amount of reversion to the mean. Everyone thought, oh, now telehealth is here to stay. This is a much more complicated story. So are you seeing that in trials too? Is some of your work this week convincing people that this is not just a COVID solution, it's a long-term solution?
Well, I think DCT is different than telehealth. And I say that because we're not talking about a single doctor's visit. We're talking about how you are engaging a patient and capturing data over 3 to 5 to sometimes a 10-year timeline. And so when you look at that combination of patient engagement, the journey, and the data to be collected, there's always a role for DCT. And that's what we're seeing that pharma is realizing. The growth of the adoption of DCT in 2022 was staggering. It went from really being something that you might try on occasional trials to our partners saying, this is going to be a strategy for the whole portfolio. We have partners where out of the gate, the plan is to do 75 in a 3-year period. And this was way after the sites reopened. So I don't think that, from a problem to be solved that's not directly correlated with or directly comparable to a telehealth solution. I can understand as a practicing dermatologist why people will revert to what they knew before. But I think in this situation, it's actually bringing new solutions to a hard problem to solve. And whether it was a pandemic or not the pandemic, those were hard problems that needed new solutions.
Absolutely. And if you have that bottom line impact, that speaks pretty loudly.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing, we're living in high inflationary times. We know that all companies are looking for efficiencies. And, we're showing pretty, I think, important and early, like tip of the iceberg, but meaningful economic savings when everyone's really looking for efficiency.
I said before, I'm very interested in the clinical trial space. I'm interested in it because it feels like it's being disrupted from a bunch of directions at once. So you've got this this decentralized phenomenon. You've got at the same time this renewed interest in diversity, representativeness. But then you also have coming in AI, machine learning, and synthetic controls. And this whole idea of longitudinal data, real world evidence. So here you're saying like the clinical trial can be a different thing than it always has been.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's a whole group coming in from the saying it can be, even that is too traditional because maybe a clinical trial isn't anything like what we think it is. Maybe it's just like data collection and comparison. So how do you think about that? How do you make sure that you're kind of poised for wherever it goes?
Yeah, I think the randomized control trial remains the best scientific approach to date to doing a clinical trial. With that said, do we have to randomize to actual, real people, or can we replace the placebo arm with data? I think that, we're starting to develop new models, which are really, really important. I believe that, when you take a step back and you say, what is the problem we're really addressing or question? It is you have an intervention and that intervention has an impact on the health of a person and double click also a disease, but a whole person. And it may have an impact bigger than the disease itself. So I believe that, when you think about that whole person and then the disease aspect of it, where we're going, and I think actually the Inflation Reduction Act makes this even more of a priority, we need to have research that actually measures the impact on the whole person, not just the disease. So where I really see this going, and it certainly leverages data integration, it leverages, machine learning and automation, is a better way to create that picture of the whole person, and also do it in a way that we're focusing on the intervention, the assessment of the intervention, and using novel methodologies in addition to take out some of those areas where it might not make as much sense to spend so much time and energy enrolling a patient who's actually not getting the intervention. Now, there's a lot to be done there, but I think that the future will look very different than where we are today.
Yeah, well said. I've heard twice now this idea about like the FDA is fast track approving some drugs, and then they say, but you've got to run the phase 3 after it's already approved.
Yeah.
Well, who the heck wants to be in a clinical trial of a drug that they could just be prescribed?
Mm-hmm.
You know, would you rather have a 50% chance of being in the placebo group or a 100% chance of having the drug? So how do those trials ever get run?
Right.
It's a really interesting sort of situation that they've been backed into there.
Yeah, and I think that the regulators, I think, help drive change by providing like new challenges. So what you see that, one step forward also creates kind of a new set of things to solve for. So there's no doubt that we should have, I believe, earlier approvals, especially when you're looking at diseases that really have no great options today. Because it's also, you have to ask that ethical question, like, does it make sense to withhold all of the access to this? If we're seeing good data in a phase 2, if it's a life-saving drug, we could do it prior to the phase 3. With that said, as you do put the drug companies or the, drug developers into that position, they need to get creative. So does the agency, so do the regulators, around how you actually meet those outcomes of patient benefit, patient access, and the data you need in that broader sense.
So I've been asking everybody the same question. I'm sure you're going to have a different take on it because you're coming from the clinical trial side. And I've been talking to a lot of just like drug developers. And the question is, what are the major trends you see shaping R&D in pharma in 2023?
What I see is that I think we're in a golden age of science. I think when you look at the progress of mRNA, this was a technology we've been working on since the 60s, but suddenly the application of it becomes something I think so profound with so much potential. Now, what we know though is the clinical trial remains the bottleneck. So if we want to go from, right now 37 drugs were approved last year. The average is around 50. Well, one, why fewer? And two, why have we only had the same rough number of approvals for 10 years? Clearly, in a golden age of science, we should be able to see more shots on goal, ideally, and therefore more approvals without lowering any of the standards. So to me, what I see is awesome leverage of technology and innovation on the true kind of basic science and preclinical development. I don't see that same level of innovation and technology applied to clinical development prior, I'd say, to companies like Medable. I think the data we're showing to bend the cost curve is really suggestive of a new era. But what we need that same type of leverage of technology that we see in preclinical to be applied to the clinical process. That's how we're going to unlock not 50, 500 drugs approved. That's how we go from 10,000 untreated diseases currently not being treated for 200 years, the current pace, to 20 years. So that's what motivates me, is to say, as awesome as the basic sciences, the preclinical science, we don't get cures until we solve this problem.
Are there going to be losers when trials move towards decentralized? Are there people who work at sites, CROs, who are going to find themselves out of a job or need to retrain or pivot?
I do not see that the case at all. And I'm also, a physician. I still see patients. I'm working in a clinic seeing, in some cases, 50 patients a day. What we see, and this is how our partners use our product, is the clinical site plays a critical role in caring for the patient, but the patient is able to generate more of that data at home. That, and also to have more flexibility around where and how that site intervenes or provides care or does the clinical trial activities. The vast majority of the trials are hybrid, and the sites are always playing that critical role. I don't really see that clinical staff, the investigator, the doctor, the CRAs, I don't see a world where they're less important. I just think it's like everything, not only does your chef prepare food for you in the restaurant now Uber Eats can deliver that to your door. But the foundational work that chef is doing to bring you that, wonderful food, that what you're looking to benefit from, that's not foundationally changing.
Yeah, so it really is. It's a virtualization effort. It's not an automation effort. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's just scale through
Right.
avoiding the essentially inefficiencies
Right.
of in-person sites.
And there are big automation opportunities, but I don't see that being applied to, the critical work that the investigator and the clinical staff are doing to provide the value that they're best positioned to provide in the clinical trial.
Which almost brings us back to diversity, right? Diverse recruitment,
Yeah.
because so whenever I have a conversation about that, and I'm working on a piece about it right now, I hear about trust and community leaders and people hearing from people who look like them, and it's just so clear that when it comes to researchers and site leaders, their humanity is a very key part in their ability to connect directly with the patients and help them feel comfortable with what a clinical trial is and what they're doing.
Yeah, what I see as a physician, and I see this when I'm a patient, fear is a natural human emotion when you don't know, you don't have enough context to really evaluate any sort of decision. So, for example, I have a rational fear of flying, but then I take a step back, I look at the numbers, like, okay, this, I'm now more informed and I can actually really then go forward with a decision that I think is right for me. I think that, interventions in medicine are no different. It's really about providing that context, but doing it in a way that is already a trusted source of information. I think, during COVID, I believe there was a lot of criticism towards anti-vaxxers. And I obviously am pro-vaccine for developing those drugs. But as a physician, I think where my lens goes and my understanding is we haven't developed, the problem to be solved is one of trust and communication. It's not a criticism on any side. It's really a problem to be solved to generate the right communication and the right approaches where suddenly the information someone's receiving, they resonate with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not, just being bombarded with information, but it's, hey, I've been seeing this primary care doctor for 10 years. I trust this person. They care for me. They know me. They're the ones informing me versus, someone you may have never met before. So I believe that we need to just take a step back and think through what are the best ways to approach this without any judgment around it. Just understanding that we as humans do better when we have a sense of trust and we're able to use that to garner a deeper understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we probably shouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole, but I think pharma
Yeah.
is starting to realize what you just said, the importance of trust from the public. I think that COVID and the Inflation Reduction Acts have both been sort of object lessons to we can't do what we do effectively if people don't trust us to be that we're working in their best interest to develop drugs to help them.
Yeah, I think that the pharmaceutical, companies, the drug developers are in a hard position in a sense because they're doing really important work. It's life-saving work. And they're doing this in a global ecosystem. They're running a business. They're trying to navigate the best way to get these drugs to a broader group of people. I do think that where an opportunity exists is to create better bridges between the benefits of those therapies and the patients who need them the most, and ensure that everyone really has access to those therapies, so that when we look around, you can say, hey, all boats are rising among the group of people who need this the most.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. This has been really fun and very interesting. So I hope we'll keep in touch. Any final thoughts? Anything else on your mind for the show?
No, I mean, I love that you're bringing your expertise from digital health and to bringing it into this pharma world. I think, we in pharma need more innovation. And, I love, just excited to see the work you're doing to bring that voice of innovation into life sciences. So thanks for your time.
Well, thank you very much. Same to you.
Cool.